because it may come from a good intention of like, oh yeah, hey, just do this. Oh yeah, hey, just do that. But you're playing whack-a-mole and it's essentially a punt. Hi, I'm Russ.
And I'm Danny.
And this is the Memory Makers Podcast.
The show that helps you create amazing customer experiences and make more memories.
Memory Makers Podcast. Made up one. No cultural pop reference or things that anyone would recognize. So not that they would anyway.
When you said it was made up, in my mind, I was like, aren't these all made up?
Ish. Yeah. Some of them, are divined from actual things. And other ones, it's just what chaos is lending itself today. So, that's just how we do.
The chaos of Russ's brain. We get a tiny glimpse and then we move on to the actual topic that we want to talk about.
That's right. Let's get into it, man. I'm excited for this one.
So today we're going to take content that comes from two different books written by a guy named Michael Bungay Stanier. I believe that's how you pronounce his name. And so the first book that he wrote was called The Coaching Habit, and the second book was called The Advice Trap. And so Russ and I are going to kind of walk through some of the things he talks about in these books and give you some suggestions, because we all want our coworkers and our employees to be more self-sufficient and rely on us less as leaders, as managers, as owners, whatever the case may be for you. To accomplish this, very often we usually default to giving advice. Someone presents a problem to us and we say, this is how you fix it, go do that. And this feels like the fastest way to fix the problem the employee has. And well, yes, it will fix the problem very quickly because you may know the answer right away. But when a future problem arises that's not identical, but it's sort of similar, you haven't given that employee any of the context on how you came to that decision or that solution. So they're just going to come right back to you again, and then again, and then again for every problem that opens up in the future, because you haven't given them the ability to think critically on your own. You've given them a fish instead of teaching them to fish. And so in today's episode, we're gonna talk about another way to approach these conversations instead of jumping into advice giving. We're going to talk about how to ask questions so that we as leaders can stay curious a little longer and help coach our employees to start solving problems on their own. And so in the book, Michael, the author, talks about 3 different vicious cycles that leaders and managers can fall into. Number 1, the cycle is creating overdependence. And so the more that you help your people and give them the answer, the more they rely on you and the busier you are until you become the bottleneck for all of the work because everybody's coming to you to fix those problems. Vicious cycle number 2 is that, and these are all connected, you then become overwhelmed with those requests. The more productive you are, the more that you help your employees find that answer instead of allowing them to find the answer, the more that gets thrown your way until you become overwhelmed by that work. And then the last piece of this puzzle is that the more that you get kind of caught up in this mundane day-to-day of solving these smaller problems, the more disengaged and demotivated you could become, and the more that the work may not feel as meaningful or fulfilling anymore, because you're spending your time trying to solve your employees' problems instead of being able to spend most of your time working on the things that you are uniquely positioned to do based upon your position as the leader or the manager or the owner, the things that are really going to move the needle. And so those are kind of those vicious cycles that are connected of overdependence, overwhelm, and disconnection from the team.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting too, because as a person who has good seasons where I feel like I really, avoid some of those cycles, but then other times where I do feel like I fall into these traps. It's to your point, coming at it from the mindset of giving a fish versus teaching how to fish. How are we empowering them to solve these problems, themselves in the future? Because that is the shorter path. It may not feel like it in the time because we're playing whack-a-mole and doing all of that. But yeah, these things really resonated with me. One, with those vicious cycles where it's like, ooh, yeah, I've gone through times like that. And when I'm not kind of either holding up the mirror or asking, even afterwards of, hey, like coming forward in the future, what are some things that I can help you understand so that way you've got a better filter to approach this. An interesting piece that I found that helped me kind of realize, like, what is, we always talk about, you don't want to be answering the same question twice. Like, questions are great and all of that stuff, but if we're getting the same thing over and over. And so one thing that I started to do was even on my tablet, kind of making some sticky notes and color coding them of, by person. And then, if there were like bigger questions and not the like, hey, I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this, just wanted to confirm nothing's changed. Like, is this the way that you would do this? But like actually tackling stuff and trying to put some keywords and notes so that way I can have a visual representation of what are the things that are coming across most for either this person or this team, because then over the course of a week or a month or a quarter, I can have a better understanding of, okay, there's an information gap somewhere that's happening here, or there's a process that is unclear when we're dealing with those kinds of things, because then we can take that, make it a bigger learning experience, have an intentional discussion with the team or the person around some of that, in their one-on-ones or the weekly meetings. So that's definitely started to help me as I've tried to be more intentional around some of these things. But, in the advice trap in this book, they also talk about, okay, when you do have these kind of, hey, we're going to jump in and I'm going to fix this problem for you, there are these advice monsters, right, is how he categorizes it. And there are these different personas that this can take. And you can't ever really get rid of these, right? But it's how do we tame the demon? And quick shout out for those of you who remember Ace Ventura from back in the day. It's like, how do you exorcise the demons? Because this is one that can be really tricky because it may come from a good intention of like, oh yeah, hey, just do this. Oh yeah, hey, just do that. But you're playing whack-a-mole and it's essentially a punt. And so the first of these three advice monsters that he categorizes is like the tell it monster. So this is, hey, just do this. Hey, just do that. Oh, yeah, all you got to do is, and this is, you've got to have all of the answers. And you feel like if you don't have the immediate answer for them in that moment, that you're letting them down or that it's failing and that things aren't going to be able to get done if you don't have the answer immediately on hand, which I identify a lot with because I don't like to let people down. I want them to feel like they can come to me with these questions and we can find a path forward with it. But at the times when I'm quick to do that, and Danny, you're always a great counterpart to this as far as some of these natural tendencies, is like, you may be dealing with a lot of symptoms at that point if you're not handling that appropriately, and you just get into the whack-a-mole of like, yep, answer that question, yep, answer that question. And one of the things that you've helped me with a lot, just with how your brain operates, is, okay, but why are we seeing some of that? And where is some of that coming? Which is why I started looking at, some of the visual, like the sticky notes and color coding, just trying to give myself some sort of zoomed out version of like, what is actually happening with all of this? So you don't feel like you're just in the weeds of that thing.
What's interesting about this, and this exchange right now is not at all in our plan of what we're going to talk about, which happens quite a bit. But this is a real-time interesting realization, because what I wish I would have opened with in this episode is that when we're talking about some of these things, this is not myself coming from on high and preaching the way that people need to do it, because I struggle with this stuff so much, of the advice giving. And if I know the answer, well, here's the answer and let's move on. Mm-hmm. But it's very fascinating where in my own mind, I'm saying, oh, I really struggle with this. But then you're telling me that, oh, no, I'm very helpful in the way that I approach it. So now I'm working through these two different conflicting things in my mind in real time.
Well, but that's the dichotomy, right? Like if you even like shout out to Jocko Willink, like dichotomy of leadership. Both of these things are going to exist in your world. There are times that you're going to be better about it because you slept better, you didn't get cut off in traffic, or it was something that you've heard this podcast and you're trying to be more intentional about it, whatever. And so it's back to our friend Mark Keene, who always says you only can be told something once. You need to be reminded of it a lot more in order for that to permeate and form the habit. And so that for me, that tell it monster is definitely one that's there. But and it's also like, hey, when I'm coming to you with a thing, I'm like, hey, this seems weird that I should be like, am I nuts? Is this just me? Whatever. It's almost, there are certain ways that when I bring stuff to you, it does force you to be more present and things. But depending on other days, like you're going to have good days, you're going to have bad days. And the goal is to just try to continually chip away at it, be more consistently on the happy side of this, because that is what's going to, create the, a little bit more of the evolution, not a revolution of change. Like there are things that can move the needle pretty quickly here, but it is a learned behavior that is subject to a lot of outside noise. And so you just have to make sure that you're keeping it at the top of your queue. So don't doubt yourself, man. You're fantastic and perfect. Okay.
Well, no one's claiming that I'm perfect, not even me. So let's move on.
There are times, the biggest thing and a good segue to this is like, there are times where it's good to acknowledge that to your team member of like, that's an interesting question. Like Scott came to me and was like, hey, client's asking for this. We've never really done this before. What are your thoughts? And it was later at night, and I'm like, my initial reaction is no, but I also need to sleep. And like, I know that my answer in this moment is not going to be a good, rational one. So let me come back to you tomorrow morning on a rested mind, because 10:30 at night is not the time where I'm going to be giving you like a well-balanced, well thought out thing. So even looking at that as, that's a win, right? Because it's normally it'd be a, whack that mole, tell it, so that way we can have it done and moved on. So giving yourself a little bit of grace and recognizing that your team will actually appreciate it more of, hey, I want to give this the proper diligence that it needs. So like we need to workshop this. We need to process it a little bit before we get into an immediate thing. The next monster is the save it monster. So this is I don't want to be a burden to other people. I've got to, if I'm not involved with it though, like, I'm really worried of whether or not it's going to be successful, which is a big red flag and an indicator of just your trust in the team. And so when you start seeing these things of like, I've really got to keep my finger on the pulse of this, otherwise it's going to go sideways quick. You need to ask yourself, is that because it's the people involved, or do they not have the tools involved to be able to actually address this thing? But your job, you can't be fully responsible for every single thing that's happening all the time. Like this is that delegation, this is the building them up, teaching them how to fish a little bit more. And sometimes where this shows up for me is, okay, how long has this person been in this role? Is this something that should still be coming up? Have they had the opportunity to solve things like this before? And if not, like, am I pushing baby birds out of the nest often enough? Like, if you feel like this is how things are showing up for you typically or most commonly as far as the advice monsters go, this is a really good one of go back and find some of these delegation, type of episodes and things that we've done in the past, because that tends to be a lot more of, okay, am I causing now a broken process because everything has to run through me and it therefore can't get solved faster because of then I'm overstacking my deck. And so you need to have a heavy, level of responsibility for it, but the responsibility is making sure that your team and your players have the tools and the input and context that they need in order to solve it. And then we get into a control it, where the only way to, and this is where it gets in. So these two are closer together. So the control it side of the monster is I have to directly be doing all of the things or it can't get done, which is different from the save it, where it's like I need to be kept informed all the time of what's there. And so as long as I'm in charge, and everything's getting vetted through me, that's where these different things can be a little murky and problematic for you as a leader, right? So understanding which of these things will typically show itself most, or depending on the circumstances, which am I most prone to kind of default to. And so from the save it perspective, again, it's you always have to have that answer. You're going to be a little bit more susceptible to treating the symptoms, not the root cause of the problem. If you're in the save it, and holding all the cards and making sure that everybody's, got what they need all the time. And you're kind of playing a little bit more of the whack-a-mole. And then the control it is, are you taking away autonomy from the team? And so there's different ways that those things can do it. It can be a blend of the two, but one's going to be a little bit more dramatic. And these are all extreme versions or implications, right? Like we're extrapolating this to its worst form so that way you have an understanding a little bit more of how that shows. But how taking the time when people are coming to you for advice or have questions, keeping this at top of mind of, okay, I don't want to set them up for this. Like, what is the deeper level of the problem? Am I doing what I need to do in order for them to move forward when this comes up again, that they have a good understanding of how to tackle it moving forward? And am I negatively or positively reinforcing how this shows up, right? Am I irritated and miffed and not allowing them to do the things of themselves, which then in turn is causing that vicious cycle?
So now that everyone listening has a framework to understand where our desire to give advice comes from, now I want to jump into some methods you can use to help tame or quiet that monster and stay curious a little bit longer. The first one is called priming. And so this is something that athletes are really, really good at. You think about someone who's getting ready for a match or a game or a competition, whatever it is, and a lot of times they'll have their headphones on and they'll be listening to a specific kind of music and they'll be going through the pre-game ritual. They have these things to get their mind and their body ready to perform exactly the way they need it to perform. Well, we can take the same kind of concept and apply it to meetings with people. If you know that you're very prone to the tell it as an example, and you're going to get in meetings and people are going to ask questions, and you're going to say, do this, do this, do this, do this. You can give yourself almost a mental mantra to say in your head or out loud before the meeting. It could be something like slow down or something like stay curious. Whatever that thing is that can speak to you, to be that little reminder in the back of your head to prime yourself before you get into that meeting, to be able to ask more questions and allow the other person to start solving the problem on their own. The next strategy that he identifies is basically setting very specific parameters for change. Because sometimes what happens is we say, well, okay, I'm going to stop giving advice in every single meeting I'm in, and I'm going to allow my teams to start solving problems on their own. It's too many things at once to try to change. And so he recommends identifying a very specific person or team that you're prone to giving advice to, or a specific circumstance or place where this happens. And so this is a framework that he provides from the book. When blank happens, instead of blank, I'm going to blank. So here's how this might play out in an example. When Joe walks into my office and he's flustered and overwhelmed, instead of immediately solving the first problem I see, I'm going to ask questions and get curious. Mm-hmm. Now, by identifying those specific parameters, I'm not trying to change everything at once. I'm just trying to change this one circumstance with Joe that happens frequently enough that when he walks in my office, as an example, apply whatever makes sense for you. And then the more often you get better at that situation, you can start applying these parameters to other situations and grow a little bit over time. Mm-hmm. Now, the last part about this, the last tactic that he has is the generosity of silence. So what happens a lot, and I see this in so many different leaders, is we can get uncomfortable in silence. We can ask a question, and if there's a couple seconds that go by, we immediately want to jump in and start either giving more context to the question or changing the subject or giving them the answer we wanted to hear from them, because it feels awkward at times to ask a question and just shut our mouths. And his reframing for this is actually your silence is generous. There's generosity in your ability to shut up because you are being generous in the space that you give and the time that you give for the other person to fully process the question and then give a response. But when we ask a question and we don't give enough time and then we just jump in again, we're actually being selfish because we're the ones who are uncomfortable. We're projecting that on them. So if we can reframe this whole idea as being generous with our silence, it allows them space. And so the reason why we wanted to go through this topic is if we back out and kind of look at this is We understand that how easy it is to give advice to other people, even if they're not asking for it. And this is not just at work. This is in our personal lives. This is everywhere. Some of us love giving advice. And it's realizing that when we get caught in that vicious cycle, there are the ideas of the overdependence from our team and the overwhelm for us and the disconnection from others. And then there are those different personas that the advice monsters can take on, of the tell it, the save it, and the control it. And so this whole episode for us is about recognizing these things, giving you language and framework to see where it shows up for you, and giving you these 3 specific methods for being able to tame those advice monsters a little bit more, so that as you continue in your communication with all of your team members or all of your family or all of your friends, or fill in the blank of whatever that is, your communication can be a bit more effective instead of being the person who just tells everyone else what to do.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's interesting as we've gone through these things too, like some of the different ways to curb it. One, I love the priming, just because that starts to allow you to, one, make sure that you're just being present for them in the first place. I think that then when you look at like the specific change technique, that to me is really good if you get into, like, if you tend to be a little bit more on like the tell it side, at least at first blush. And I'm sure that other folks will have different crisscrosses of how these things can match up well. And they're all pretty applicable across the board. But the specific change piece is nice to me for the tell it, because you can now say like, ooh, if I know that my immediate reaction is to always just start giving this answer and giving that answer, how am I going to do that? And then what I really like about the generosity one, as well, is especially if you are in a save it kind of mode, like that to me seems to be a really, really good alignment. All of these things work, and you should try to do a combination of them for whichever way that it shows up for you. But there's just so many things that we don't have control over in these processes. And so if we're able to be specific, and that specific change piece too, like, give yourself grace, you know, as we all age and mature and come through these processes. Like, you come across a lot of other adults who either don't have their shit together or don't have all of the answers, and you realize like, okay, there are times where there are unforeseen things that come into play, and me not having all of the answers, or me feeling it's my responsibility to correct for something that is completely outside of my team's control in the immediate, like, those are 1 step forward, 2 step back kind of things. And you'll end up being a lot more reactive to it. And so that's where, you know, Danny and I, as we go through this, and we, you know, it's cyclical. Like, there are times where you can be really present and feel like you're giving the space and asking more questions and listening more and giving them time to internalize it and process it as well, that it makes such a huge difference. So it's really those stressful times and things where it's take a moment, be present, try to understand more through questions what they're asking, or what lengths that they've gone through, but then also doing a little postmortem and saying, okay, is this a person thing? Is this a process thing? And how do we start to address that at a higher level? So I really like these books. I think that they do a good job of giving us some very practical applications on how to fix stuff that bugs us.
I think that's a perfect place for us to wrap it up for this episode.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Well, if you guys have anything else that you're looking for, always hit us up. But we've got more awesome content coming your guys' way through the weekly episodes. More, as you guys have seen, the rotation of operators and industry, suppliers, as well as the entrepreneurial and leadership growth pieces. So if there's something that falls into one of those categories or something completely outside of it, just hit us up.
Yeah, if you like what you heard, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review.
I love it. And give us those 5 stars, please and thank you, but only if we've earned it.
Only if we've earned it. You earned it, Russ.
Thank you.
And as Russ mentioned, if you got ideas for future episodes, topics, or guests, follow us on social media. Send us a DM. It's the best way to get in touch.
I love it. And as always, big shout out to Mikey Mike on the 1s and 2s, working the Ultranet for us. And we will see you on the next one, Troublemakers. Do you want monster? Yeah.
Positive energy.
Making Mike's framing difficult. This is bro science-y until I verify further. Apparently when you sleep, your spine can lengthen, I think. And so then it can, stuff can feel off then. It sort of made sense from that standpoint. If you were already recording, you can be sure to throw in that anecdotal bro science.
So much bro science.
Science. Go forth and conquer.
See ya.
All right, bye.